Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, "My Neighbor Called the Cops Because We Decided to Clean Our Apartment." I had recently moved into a new apartment with my girlfriend, and we were excited to start a new chapter in our lives. The apartment was older, with creaky floors that required us to cover 90% of any room with carpet. We had already laid down several rugs, but our downstairs neighbor still complained about the noise. She started banging on the ceiling every time we walked around, even during the day. We tried to be considerate, but it seemed like nothing we did was good enough. Our neighbor even accused us of following her around and listening to her every move. We knew she was being ridiculous, but we still tried to keep our distance and avoid any confrontation. One day, we decided to clean our apartment. It was a lazy Sunday morning, and we had nothing else to do. As soon as we started cleaning, our neighbor went berserk. She banged on the ceiling so hard that we thought she was going to break through. We could even hear muffled yelling from her apartment. We ignored her and finished cleaning. As we were leaving, she confronted us in the hallway, demanding that we stop walking around so much. My girlfriend tried to reason with her, but she was beyond reasoning. She even threatened us, saying that she didn't live alone and that we should be careful. We called the cops, and they arrived shortly afterward. We explained the situation, and they talked to our neighbor. They told her that it was perfectly acceptable to walk around your apartment during the day and that she couldn't bang on our ceiling anymore. For a few nights afterward, she continued to bang on the ceiling at odd hours, trying to wake us up. But eventually, the banging stopped. We later found out that she had been bothering our other neighbors as well, and her lease was not renewed. We were relieved that the ordeal was over, and we could finally enjoy our apartment in peace. However, a few weeks later, we received an unexpected update. Our landlord had found evidence that our neighbor had been spying on us through a hole in the ceiling. She had installed a camera and was recording our every move. The landlord immediately terminated her lease and reported her to the authorities. She was arrested and charged with several offenses, including stalking and invasion of privacy. We were shocked and horrified by the news, but also grateful that we had called the cops when we did. Who knows how long she would have continued to spy on us if we hadn't taken action. We ended up moving out of the apartment and into a new one, but the experience stayed with us for a long time. We learned that you never know what your neighbors are capable of and that it's always important to be vigilant. The next story is titled, "Sure, Call the Landowner." So, when I was 13, I was really into snowboarding, so every chance I got, I was out doing that in winter. Though in recent years, I could do so in July. There was one huge hill that was open to everyone all year long, so long as they didn't cut trees or wreck the place. This hill was located on a plot of land in the woods that, a few months prior to this event, had gone from being for sale to bought by my uncles to keep it from being bulldozed. Nobody really knew these men were my uncles because we all have different last names and my dad's family is huge. That comes up again later. One of the parents said that myself, anybody who wasn't a baby in a sled had no right to be there as we were too big and violent to be using that hill and generally let the kids steal or otherwise damage the boards, skis, or do things to drive everyone else away. I largely didn't care because when I went there, I just used my cheap $10 board that was built about as well as a plastic sled. So, I didn't have to carry my bigger, better one across town. That, as you can imagine, pissed these Karens off more. I never really understood why they were so butthurt over it. They could take their kids sledding anywhere, and there were even public roads that were shut down in winter because they were too dangerous to drive on that people used all the time as sled spots. That were also much closer to home and safer because no tree line to collide with, fallen logs, or chances of coyotes deciding their kids were snacks. After about a week of them constantly nagging and bitching, I finally said, "Look, you can sled anywhere you want." Me? Because some a-holes decided to wreck property and trespass. I cannot even snowboard on my own property because the neighbors complain that I might break their fence. So unless I want to pay hundreds of dollars to go to some fancy resort, this is the only place I can snowboard. On a plot of land half a mile wide, I'm fairly ducking certain we can all enjoy it. I didn't wait for a response. I just went on down the hill, swerving to avoid all the kids who think laying down in the middle of a place everyone is skiing, snowboarding, or sledding is a good idea, and thought that would be it. But, as you can guess, I was wrong. I was never the best at stopping, so I stopped when I hit the trees, thankful that they were still rather bendy. Over the sounds of laughter and snow being shredded, I heard the Karen screaming and turned to see her at the top of the hill, pointing at me and calling me every name in the book. Apparently, she called her husband, who confirmed they lived nearby, and said that 1. I had threatened her, 2. I had called her everything in the book, and 3. I was a grown adult. At 13, I was maybe 3 feet 9 and looked like I was 10. Her husband had to fight laughter when he saw me stomping back up the hill, wearing a hot pink Barbie snowsuit and carrying a cheap Monster Energy black with electric green board under my arm. He asked what I had said. I repeated it and admitted I knew cursing was wrong but expressed how annoyed I was. He tried to calm his wife, but she screamed more and said, "I'm calling the landowners." I smiled like the Cheshire Cat and told her, "Go right ahead. I'll speak to them, too." So, she did, and she launched into a huge rant, very animated with lots of flailing and hopping similar to an angry hen. Finally, when she starts losing steam, I can hear one of my uncles saying, "I'll be right there, sit tight." The shitty smile that spread across her face when she heard that. She sneered at me and said, "I'm going to get you in so much trouble." Her husband had gathered the kids and told them to wait in the truck by then. He looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole and die of embarrassment. After about 15 minutes, a truck pulled up and out hopped my uncles. They came over and spoke to the woman. I could tell they didn't 100% believe her, but because this was their land, if anything happened, they'd be on the hook for it. She got loud again and demanded I be banned for life, and all that. They looked around and asked her to point to the dangerous and disrespectful woman, as clearly, I was the only one snowboarding that day. She huffed and grabbed me, giving me a shake as she shouted, "This witch here." Despite it being the middle of January, I swear I heard crickets as the wheels in their heads turned. Knowing these men and how much like their own kid they saw me, it was mostly to keep from yeeting this woman into the sun. Finally, one of them spoke. "You mean our niece?" Karen sputtered and tried to come up with some sort of response but failed miserably. My uncles then gave her the choice. Leave now and come back in a couple days. They'd drive by to make sure she stayed away. Or continue acting how she was, and they'd press charges on her to have her banned and charged with assault for grabbing me, as well as being on the hook for any damages her kids caused to anybody's gear. Apparently, they'd been getting calls but nobody knew her name, so the cops couldn't do anything. She huffed and stormed off, her husband following and looking like a beat dog. She never did come back. The next story is titled, "Revenge on Towing Company." Allow me to share a win. I was visiting my girlfriend at her townhouse. The townhouse is at the entrance of the neighborhood, and not far from it is a sign warning of cars being towed. On the sign was the name and number of the towing service. In the section of this subdivision with the townhomes there are a few clearly designated no parking zones, but no such designation out in front of her townhome where I was parked. About 8:30 that evening, while we were upstairs kicked back watching TV in her bed, I suddenly saw some lights flashing through the upstairs window, and then a knock on the front door. When I looked out, I saw my car hooked up to a tow truck with the driver just standing there waiting for me to come down. He had pulled up, hooked up my car and then turned on his lights rather than pulling into the neighborhood with his lights on. I went downstairs to protest him hooking up my car and pointed out that it wasn't in a no parking zone. He then informed me that according to HOA rules the spaces in front of all townhomes were no parking zones even if they weren't marked as such. I found out later that this was true, although my girlfriend was never aware of such a rule. He then offered to drop my car if I paid a $90 drop fee. This was his shtick, collect drop fees without actually having to tow a car. In the short 3 weeks that he had the contract for this subdivision he had already hit numerous homes in the neighborhood with this scam. Then this guy made a mistake. In his attempt to be seen as the good guy, just doing his job harassing people late in the evening for quick scores, he offers to write on the ticket that he towed the car to the townhouse from a nearby interstate instead of writing it up as a drop fee for illegal parking. In this way, according to him, I could turn it into my auto insurance to get them to cover it. That way I could get my money back from the scam he was running, collecting drop fees from unsuspecting homeowners. I accepted the offer, which at the time seemed like I was catching a bit of a break. Being rousted out of bed and having an angry confrontation with a tow truck driver seemed just a bit more tolerable, knowing I would be able to get my money back. Still, the situation just eats at you and it's hard to let it go in the moment, even if eventually you are getting your money back. The next part of the story involves a wealthy landowner who developed his family's 300-acre farm to create this subdivision, and who continued to live in a more affluent elite section of the subdivision, and maintained a position as the head of the HOA that created this rule of no parking zones that existed only on paper, and that had been added years after the townhomes had been built with their clearly marked no parking zones. Sorry for that run-on sentence, but I won't go any further into that part of the story for the sake of brevity, which may seem a bit ironic at this point. It is sufficient to say that this HOA and the jackass running it are not much loved, and what took place between me and this towing company was a small victory over them also. Anyhow, the next morning I began thinking more clearly about the night before, even if I was still a bit pissed. I wanted revenge for the intrusion and the injustice of others wielding power over me. Then it dawned on me that what this driver was doing might be illegal. I called my sister-in-law, who owns an auto insurance company. I wanted to confirm my suspicion that the way this tow truck driver wrote out his towing tickets constituted insurance fraud. She confirmed that I was correct, that what this driver was doing was indeed insurance fraud. I then called up the towing company and told them that if they did not give me a full refund, that I would be turning them in for insurance fraud. 15 minutes after I made that phone call, the tow truck driver that so kindly offered to drop my car for $90 showed up at the townhouse with cash to give me a full refund. He then went to several other homes on that street and gave refunds to other people he had extorted in the 3 weeks that he had had the contract for that subdivision. I then watched as he drove down to the end of the street, the entrance of the subdivision, got out and removed the sign with tow company's name and number. He cancelled his contract with the HOA. After word got around about what had happened and why, it took the HOA 6 months to find another towing company to take the contract. The reason the HOA under that guy's rule had changed regulations to not allow parking in front of townhomes was simply that the townhomes were at the front of the subdivision, so he and a few other wealthy homeowners thought it unsightly to have cars parked at the curb when they drove by. That's it, they simply didn't like the aesthetics, and their sensibilities took precedence over the rights of the lesser inhabitants of his fiefdom. Had I actually lived in that neighborhood, I think I would have taken more drastic measures up to and including getting this tow company's license revoked, and maybe even jail time for the truck driver, not to mention creating a bigger legal headache for the HOA. My girlfriend, however, is an immigrant and fearful of American power structures, so she insisted I be satisfied with a refund, which is a win against corruption she would have never dreamt of in her home country. I abided by her wishes. She found a new home, an actual house, in a different neighborhood with an HOA that operates with an actual bare minimum of interference with residents and is very pleased with the way it is run. The last story is titled, The Entitled Streetwalkers. We live in a very small and quiet neighborhood with sidewalks on both sides of the road. Those sidewalks are apparently unusable and/or unacceptable for the 2 middle-aged ladies who live nearby. In fact, they make it a daily ritual to walk down the middle of the road, side by side, as if they own it. It's obnoxious, but our family is used to it at this point. My daughter's very mild-mannered beau had the unfortunate instance of encountering them yesterday. It was nearing dusk, and he was rather taken aback by the figures skulking alongside his car as he and my daughter were getting ready to leave. His windows were down as it was an unseasonably pleasant afternoon here, and he said, a bit too loudly, to my daughter, "Do they know there are sidewalks here?" Oh, sweet summer child, they are well aware those inferior footpaths. Though our sidewalks are uniform and well maintained throughout the neighborhood, they're not quite wide enough for these ladies. Especially when they're flailing their arms about and gesturing wildly whilst they gossip. These two ding-dongs might actually be the embodiment of mobile rumor windmills, but I digress. This was around the time I was summoned into the situation. Boyfriend and daughter had just left moments prior, which I knew for fact, thanks to Life 360. I was just doing the mom thing with my preschooler and toddler, so I didn't even hear the thumping at first. But then our doorbell rang. Again, and again, and again, coupled with frenzied rapping. Within that 30-second span, I surmised that whoever was at the door would not be leaving until they got whatever it was they wanted. As I opened the door, I surmised that my initial reckoning was correct. Before me stood the two flaxen-haired women, with fire in their eyes and spittle in the corners of their now tight-lipped mouths. Oh, Fart buckets, what's going on? I thought to myself. Something had troubled or offended them so greatly that their brows were furrowed, an astonishing feat with the amount of Botox also involved. Before I could utter a greeting, the first dame put one hand upon her ample hip. The other she balled into a fist, sans one digit wagging about wildly, and declared, "Your daughter just left here, didn't she? With her boyfriend." I stared blankly for a second, then, idiotically optimistically, said, "Hi, it's nice to see you. Your daughter just left, right?" Just a little bit ago." "Yes, what's going on?" I was getting anxious at this point. What on earth had my daughter done? She's far from angelic. Few teenagers are. She's been caught doing some very facepalm-worthy stuff, for sure. But she's never been blatantly disrespectful or openly ignorant in her antics. Holy hobgobs, what has she done now? They told us to get out of the street. The other woman blurted out. Jehoshaphat's junkies, that's what this is about. I blinked back an eye twitch as both relief and exasperation swept over me. Before I could react, the first streetwalker swiftly jumped in. They yelled at us to get out of the road. I stood there flummoxed for a second or two before the more vocal and dramatic woman continued. I mean, as a mom, I know I'd want to know if my kids did something like this. The over-exaggeration of her words cannot be properly conveyed in literary form, so I'll stop. "Oh, okay, thanks for letting me know. I'll talk to them." I said that as sincerely I could muster, while trying to mask the frustration building within. She then began to repeat the last bit. I really didn't want to hear her hiss, "This SSS," at me again, so I closed my eyes and nodded emphatically, "I get it. Got it, thanks." I silently cursed my husband for being in the shower at that very moment. I had to stand there at least semi-straight-faced and pretend like I wasn't even a little proud of my kid and or her boyfriend for saying something to these two dummies. I can't speak for the rest of the neighborhood, but for me, it's gotten old dealing with the streetwalkers' shite. I tried to do a good job of explaining to the preschooler that she cannot walk, play, be out in the road, because it's dangerous. But then she consistently sees those two grown-ass dingleberries saunter down the middle of the road sneering at her while she plays nearby. Yes, please, taunt the small child. 10. Any opportunity you get, streetwalkers. But seriously, I don't want any incidents or nonsense when it comes to the people who within everyday walking distance of my home. I love our quiet, boring, uneventful little neighborhood. I'm friendly and kind to everyone, but I'll quickly excuse myself if there's even a whiff of drama or gossip. And now the queen bees of bavardage are at my vestibule. Fork me. I was snapped back to reality by the squeals of my toddler as he tried to escape the partially open door. "Thank you so much, you cute little dinosaur." I stammered out a hasty, thanks. And sorry. I don't want this one to make a break for it, before I quickly shut and locked the door. I took great joy and relief in securing all three of the heavy locks. Thank you for listening.